For those who stood in the way of Hitler's policies, there could be no peace. The brave men and women who spoke out about the Nazis' inhumanity and persecutions of minorities were punished, imprisoned, and often killed. The history of World War II is littered with the names of men and women who profoundly disagreed, on moral and religious grounds, with Hitler's treatment of Jews and other persecuted groups, and with his foreign policy, and who paid a high price for such resistance. Dr. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor and anti-Nazi dissident, imprisoned for his vocal opposition to the euthanasia program and later the Holocaust, and hanged in the wake of the July bomb plot in July 1944. Or Polish priest Father Maximilian Kolbe, who volunteered to die in place of a stranger in Auschwitz. Or Sophie Scholl, a German student who distributed anti-war leaflets as part of the White Rose non-violent resistance group, beheaded by the Nazis in 1943 after being found guilty of high treason. The history books are full of such men and women, many considered martyrs today for the stands that they took. But what of leaders so high profile that they were not subject to Gestapo intimidation or German courts? What of national leaders who took stands against Hitler? What became of them? Well, even the leaders of foreign countries were in danger, and that danger could perhaps include assassination. It has long been suspected that Hitler had a hand in the murder of a king who dared to stand up for the Jewish population in his country, having him quietly bumped off by secret agents and replaced by a new king, a child with no power, removing at a stroke resistance to his will. The king was actually a Tsar, not of Russia but of Bulgaria, Tsar Boris III, the king who tried to protect the Jews. During World War I, Bulgaria, a small Eastern European constitutional monarchy established in 1908, when its status changed from a principality to a tsardom, fought on the side of the Central Powers, that is Germany and Austria-Hungary. Boris had become Tsar Boris III following the abdication of his father, Tsar Ferdinand I, a first cousin of British Queen Victoria after defeat in World War I. Bulgaria, along with the other Central Powers, was punished for supporting the German Kaiser, losing some of its territory and having to pay financially damaging war reparations to the Allies. Bulgarian politics were tumultuous throughout the 1920s and 30s, with several coup attempts, a harsh suppression of communists, and a move from constitutional monarchy to absolute royal power under Boris. Bulgaria moved to supporting Nazi Germany in 1940, receiving a slice of Romanian territory for its trouble. Following the Balkans campaign, during which Boris permitted German forces to move through Bulgaria to attack Greece, the Bulgarians were awarded Greek Macedonia, Thrace and Salonika, in total 50,000 square kilometers. These areas were garrisoned by the Bulgarian army, fighting partisans for years. In common with other Eastern European nations, Bulgaria had a sizable Jewish population, which the Nazis wanted removed. Boris did enact a law to deny Bulgarian Jews many of their rights in 1941, but he refused to deport them to Germany, as well as refusing to involve Bulgaria in the invasion of the Soviet Union. Boris's joining the Axis prevented his country from being invaded and occupied by the Germans, but the anti-Semitic law he passed was the quid pro quo for receiving territories from Hitler that Bulgaria wanted, and the Tsar had been forced into this position by powerful pro-Nazi members of his government. The anti-Semitic law was actually met by widespread objections from Bulgarians of all faiths. The SS was determined to rid Europe of the Jews, and considered Boris's stance to be too lenient and a block on their ambition. In 1943, an associate of Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, was sent to Bulgaria to move things along. SS Hauptsturmführer Theodor Dannecke made a secret agreement with the Bulgarian Commissioner of Jewish Affairs, the extremely anti-Semitic Alexander Belev, wherein 20,000 Jews were to be deported to German territory. Interestingly, only 8,000 of the Jews were actually Bulgarians. The rest were effectively stateless and living in territories given to Bulgaria by Germany very recently. The remaining Bulgarian Jews would be dealt with later. But the deportations in Bulgaria were met with widespread protests by Bulgarian citizens that actually led to them being postponed to some as yet undecided future date. This did not sit well with the SS, particularly when it was revealed that the decision had originated with Tsar Boris III himself. Unfortunately, though Boris's intervention saved 8,000 Jews inside Bulgaria from the Nazis, it could not stop the transportation of over 11,000 stateless Jews from the territories recently handed to Bulgaria, and these unfortunates were shipped to Treblinka and Majdanek extermination camps. Boris instructed his advisers to see if Bulgaria's Jews could be sent to Palestine, a British-controlled mandate in the Middle East, instead of deported to German camps. However, via the Swiss, the British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden turned down this request. The SS investigated the Tsar further, discovering that he had been involved with aiding the escape to Palestine of thousands of Slovakian Jews earlier in the war, helped by important figures in the Catholic Church, in the Vatican in Rome, in Venice in Italy, and Istanbul in Turkey. Hitler was losing patience with Boris. The Tsar was ordered to meet Hitler in late March 1943, partly to discuss the Jewish question in Bulgaria. The Nazis wanted Boris to begin deportations as soon as possible, but the Tsar dragged his feet. He instead made a counter-move. He ordered that all able-bodied Jewish men be forced into road-building gangs. In this way, they could not be deported. Further pressure was applied in May 1943 by SS Captain Dannecke and Commissioner Belev. A plan drafted to deport 48,000 Bulgarian Jews on river steamers via the Danube to German-controlled territory. Again, Boris blocked this move. He insisted the Jews must remain to build roads and railways. German pressure led to a public outcry in Bulgaria, an outcry supported by many politicians and the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. It was clear now to the Germans that Tsar Boris III was the bloc that was preventing them from seizing and deporting almost 50,000 Jews from Bulgaria. Hitler was also incensed by Boris's complete unwillingness to commit Bulgarian troops to the war against the Soviet Union when Germany needed all the help it could get. In August 1943, Hitler summoned Boris again. The meeting was tense, combative, and extremely argumentative. Boris refused to back down on his refusal to declare war on the USSR, and he also refused to deport Bulgaria's Jews to German camps. His only concession was to declare a symbolic war against Britain and the United States. Of course, in reality, Bulgarian troops would never meet the Western Allies on the field of battle. The British and the Americans responded to this move by launching air raids on the Bulgarian capital Sofia. Here's the strange part of the story. Boris left to return to Sofia. A few days later, he was dead, at the age of only 49. He was succeeded by his 6-year-old son, Simeon, a regency being established, led by Boris's brother, Prince Kyril, along with a council of ministers. So what had Boris died of? Officially, heart failure. But the Tsar's 2 German doctors suspected poison, for Boris's body showed signs that had been observed on the body of another statesman who had most probably been poisoned, Greek Prime Minister Metaxas, who had died in Athens in January 1941. But the German doctors could not confirm or deny poisoning because the royal family of Bulgaria refused to allow an autopsy of the Tsar. Though his sudden death might have been viewed as convenient for the Germans, as he had been a consistent thorn in their side, if he was murdered, it was also risky, as there was no guarantee that the new regent would reverse Boris's policies on the war with Russia and the Jews. With intense Allied bombing of Bulgarian cities, the new government wanted to get Bulgaria out of the war as soon as possible. German troops were in Bulgaria, stationed along the railway line that ran into German-occupied Greece. Prince Kyril and the government reached out to the Allies, sending a delegation to the Cairo Conference, but Britain and the US refused to meet them, without the Soviets also being involved, something the Bulgarians were not keen on. Worse was to follow when Stalin declared war on Bulgaria on the 5th of September 1944. The Red Army broke into the country on the 8th of September, and the next day pro-Soviet politicians and army officers launched a coup and seized power. In 1946, a full Soviet-style government was installed in Sofia that would last up until the 1990s. The monarchy was abolished and young Tsar Simeon II exiled with his Italian mother. His uncle, Prince Kyril, had not been so fortunate. He had been sentenced to death by a people's court and shot, along with dozens of former royal advisers, members of parliament, and former Prime Minister Bogdan Filov on the 1st of February 1945. Tsar Boris III's body was exhumed by communists and secretly reburied somewhere else that remains unknown today. Only his heart was found in a glass cylinder in the original grave in the 1990s and has since been reinterred. Interestingly, Tsar Simeon II would later be elected Prime Minister of Bulgaria in 2001, serving until 2005, surely a unique journey for any former king to have taken. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill said in a speech shortly after Boris's death, quote, "What happened to King Boris will also happen to others who side with Germany," unquote, a statement that was supposedly to suggest that Hitler had had a hand in the Tsar's death. But research shows that Hitler and the Nazis were as confused about Boris's sudden death as the Allies were. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Nazi propaganda minister, noted in his private diary, which was found after the war, in an entry on the 10th of September 1943, some interesting statements that suggested that the Italians were responsible for Boris's demise. On the 25th of July 1943, the Italian king had dismissed Benito Mussolini from the post as prime minister. Anti-Italian feeling was running high in Berlin after this, even though the new Italian Prime Minister, Marshal Pietro Badoglio, swore allegiance to the Axis, at least for now. The Germans rightly suspected that Badoglio and the Italian king were secretly negotiating with the Western Allies, and therefore the Germans prepared to plan to take over parts of Italy that were not under Allied control in the event the Italians switched sides. Interestingly, Tsar Boris's wife was the King of Italy's sister. Dr. Goebbels wrote in his diary, on the 10th of September 1943, 2 days after Italy had indeed switched sides. The Führer told me that it must now be regarded as certain that he was killed by snake poison. It is not yet known who mixed the poison. The German doctors wanted to perform an autopsy. The Bulgarian government agreed, but the royal family refused. I would not regard it as impossible that the poisoning was engineered by the Italians. After their latest act of treachery, I am ready to credit the Badoglio regime and the Italians generally with anything." Unquote. So why would the Italians want Boris dead? It seems that the Italian king and the new government wanted to deliver Bulgaria along with Italy to the Allies, and removing Boris and replacing him with his half-Italian son was one way to do it. However, it does seem rather far-fetched. Could one of the other Nazi leaders have been responsible for the king's death? Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, for example. He had the motive. Boris was preventing Himmler from acquiring control over Bulgaria's Jews. However, no evidence of SS involvement in Boris's death has ever emerged. In fact, the Germans had an idea that Boris was not a well man for some time before his sudden death. Secret reports sent by Enigma machine from Sofia indicated that some senior Germans knew that the king had a serious heart condition that would eventually prove fatal. But still, even today, there are those who believe that Boris actually succumbed to poison. It is impossible to completely rule out foul play, but the evidence does suggest, based on Goebbels' private diary, that Hitler did not have a hand in it, due to his surprise statements. Discounting the Italian plot, we are left with the only real evidence of a cause of death, heart failure caused by natural disease rather than foul play. What can be said is that Tsar Boris III's early death, at the age of only 49, would send his nation on a disastrous course, but he will nonetheless be remembered for his steadfast refusal to hand over Bulgaria's Jews to the Nazis. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.